These general requirements, actually, we don't need to spend much time on, but they are kind of strict as well. And one of the ones that's potentially limiting access to Tysabri is that anyone who uses Tysabri, because of the hazards of PML and the strict monitoring required, has to go through a specific training program and have to be registered to allow the use of the treatment. And you can continue the... Yes, I do have the words there. That being able to use the older treatments means that there has to be some specified reason why you can't use the new ones, or if it's considered, then there's a useful grey term there, not clinically appropriate. And Pharmac, fortunately, has accepted the interpretation of not clinically appropriate very widely. So a terrible fear of PML, for instance, is considered an appropriate reason why you might not want to use Tysabri, and a terrible fear of edema in your retina in your eye is a clinically appropriate reason for not using fingolimod, although those risks are both small, of course. But people vary a lot in how risk-averse they are, as you would know. Oh yes, the important thing is that you can continue under the old program if you want to. If you're on the old program, you can't enter. You can't use the new treatment, the old treatments though, under the old program. If you want to start betaferon or Copaxone now, you have to meet the current criteria, not the old criteria. But if you're on the old system, then you stay on it. Now, one of the things that will come up, and it hasn't yet because we haven't been using this long enough, is that not only if you reach an EDSS of 4.5 do you have to stop, but if you start low and get worse significantly before you hit 4, you still have to stop. Now, that's going to create problems for people who happen to have a relapse and may be left with some disability that may be inappropriately potentially tipped off treatment, and we've fussed a lot about that, but when we raised a fuss, Pharmac said that if you want to revisit that, we're going to start the negotiations from scratch.
Did Pharmac say how they came up with this? Because one of the issues with Pharmac is that this is not, I've never seen this published anywhere.
No, it's not. It's a sense, it's clearly, Pharmac is obsessed with the idea that we should stop treatment in anyone who's not doing well on treatment. And they came up, this is actually close to what was present in the old treatment, and so they were using a significant shift in disability. Their perception was, well, that indicated that people probably had progressive disease. We've had struggle to explain that people have a relapse may shift in position. So this is a fishhook sitting in the system that's potentially going to create problems, but we accepted in the end that the only way to resolve this was to get the new program started and then wrestle with it subsequently. There's also other clauses in there that if you get worse on one treatment and the EDSS gets worse. So if you have relapses, you switch to and start the new treatment, say fingolimod, you have relapses, you can switch to natalizumab if you wish, as long as your EDSS hasn't got worse. That's pretty ridiculous, but that's in the wording in the regulations. So we'll have to wrestle with that one too. That's the issue that I raised there. Now, what if you're on the old program? Can you switch?
Is there a formal communication between the society and Pharmac?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I think they've been red-hot mail going back and forth for several years. Some intemperate comments made from time to time.
What I'm asking is whether there's a formal process and that there's a communication system that can be deemed to be successful in terms of the knowledge transfer
Well, Pharmac does act on its own terms. It's very definitely what it does, and it's very much driven by cost-benefit analyses. Social needs don't. Well, I mean, there may be a wording in there somewhere, but it basically doesn't. It's proven medical effectiveness is the terms that they use to approve treatments, and then balancing one. They're making a decision about treatment for new breast cancer medicines versus MS treatment. We're competing for MS treatment with other treatments. They have a budget and they have to work within it. I should say that they're very effective at getting drugs at good cost. We pay the costs for these treatments, they're expensive, but the costs are about 30% of what the Americans pay for the same treatments. And right now the American system is struggling greatly. I think you're going to find, although they've had open treatment, they can't afford these ongoing open access to all of these treatments in their health service anymore. Britain's always been a little tight on the budget as well. Australia has been very free, as you've heard, but with their budget struggling, I forget how many $1 billion in the hole their last budget is. It may be they're going to have to develop systems like Pharmac's as well to try and keep control of it.
Just going to say that, just to respond what was the MS Society's view, MS New Zealand has been engaged with Pharmac. MS Auckland and MS New Zealand made submissions to Pharmac in terms of the approvals, and one of the ones that we supported a number of clinicians, including submissions made by Wallace, was that people on the existing treatments should be allowed to continue, and that was a change that was made from the original determination by Pharmac and the final decision. I think my sense is that Pharmac have in fact become more responsive to organisations like ours than they have been in the past. But I concur absolutely with everything that you said, that they're budget driven. I personally, and one of the things that I would like to see funded and worked through is their criteria and the cost-benefit analysis. We asked for a copy of their cost-benefit analysis around these new treatments, and when I received it, it was 103 pages long, and you would need to be a mathematician of university standards and probably an actuary to be able to understand it. So no normal mortal person could understand their criteria.
Right, so you can switch. And initially it wasn't clear whether there were any particular criteria for switching, which has been one of the holders, but it's clear now Pharmac has been pretty relaxed about anyone on treatment, as long as their EDSS is 4.0 or less, can switch. It turns out we don't have to show that there's been active disease on treatment. If you don't like the jabs and you want to switch, you can do so. It just requires a bit of a process in the application, just for initial applications. And this is the background to the switching, that currently on the old program, at least at the time the new regulations came in, there were about 680 patients on the old treatments, of whom about 85% had an EDSS of 4.0 or less. So potentially 85% of the 680 can switch. And Pharmac was expecting that most would switch within the first year. And what has surprised them is that quite a high proportion, the proportion wanting to switch immediately as people come up for renewal, has been much less than Pharmac expected. So in some ways that's been a surprise to them, and partly a pleasant surprise because it's less expensive for them. But they've also been more initial applications than they were expecting, so that was a surprise they